Jeff, what do you got going on right now? Anything?
Yeah, this morning I've got a meeting with a group to help get my marketing strategy going with some local engineers, architects, surveyors type of thing. And then after that, I go fly a site for a mapping mission that's just getting out of the ground foundation wise for a hotel. So I'm going to map that and get that processed for them. And then at 4 o'clock, I have a meeting phone call with Christopher Tavini from RAAD that reached out to me. So
Nice.
Good to hear.
Yeah.
a little bit of a busy day.
Yeah. What brought this all about, Teja, was the fact that, I had already went down the rabbit hole of who you were on LinkedIn because I'd seen what you were posting and it showed up on my feed. It's like, well, this looks interesting. And like I said, I went down that rabbit hole, and a couple of the groups that I'm on and this group also, evidently y'all had reached out to some people to get them to sign up with your service, and they had questions and I answered what I could. And it's like, well, let me just reach out, and what's the worst that can happen? He could say no, and then we have a typical Thursday morning call where we deal with our accountability and see what's going on. So
I think that's a great strategy. We've early on at RAD, one of the things that was really important to us is that we personally engage with everyone who joins the network, whether on the client or pilot side. And so that meant 15-minute calls with pilots 8-9 times a day. But now we're eclipsing 500 pilots, and my inbox is just overflowing with questions, comments, feedback, and the feedback's awesome. Like, ultimately, we're building a platform for pilots, so talking to pilots about the features they want is important. But the backlog is so big now that if in one forum I can answer questions and just talk to y'all about what we're doing, and that can be dispersed to multiple parties, that gives us all a nice bit of leverage.
yeah, it does. And it's like I said, I think it's good I think what you're doing is going to be amazing for the industry wise. 'Cause one of the things that we deal with is with the drone service networks is a competition between pilots. I mean, I'm tied into a bunch of them. In fact, I just turned down a job from Fly Guys because, well, be straight up honest, because the pay, it's almost really close to 1,800 acres. That's Wingtra territory for me, and I don't have a Wingtra just because, I mean, that's just a huge parcel of land. And then the pay was not worth me driving 3 hours round trip and then spending 5 to 6 hours on site. And I was like, you know what, I've got a project that I'm working on here with my primary client that I'm going to go fly the site, and at the end of the day I'll make $300 more for 5 less hours. So
Do be like that.
yeah, so it is what it is. So let's, we haven't talked at all. So what's, for those that, well, I've got two guys here, but for the people that will see this, let's start with just, so where are you coming from and how did you get into this space?
Sure. So I really started my career in finance. I quit that life when I was about 25, had a bit of a quarter life crisis, knew I didn't want to kind of follow the traditional path. So I moved to Turkey for 3 months. I drank a lot of espresso. I got addicted to cigarettes. I read a lot. When I came back, I decided I would do things kind of my own way and take more risk, being young and wanting to build companies that really make a difference as opposed to kind of following a script and shuffling around risk as so much of finance is. So I started a company called Entheos. We were building a new kind of battery management system for industrial scale lithium ion systems. Did that for about 18 months. We raised a seed round for that. Beautiful piece of technology. Basically sought to convert electricity, so any sort of voltage transformation or from AC to DC or vice versa, without an external inverter at all. So the battery itself would do all that stuff. Very nitty gritty, technical, difficult, a lot of fires in the lab. We ended up sunsetting that, unfortunately, in 2023. And then in 24, we founded RAAD. And RAAD's origins were really slightly different than the iteration you see today. What we had kind of identified was an opportunity to provide to businesses, whether insurers or logistics companies or power traders, an API for more real-time, hyper-local weather and climate data. And so the way we're going to go about that, the original kind of manifestation was we would incentivize individual property owners to deploy weather stations on their properties and get to a density of these weather stations that would really be unparalleled. So rather than a few NOAA stations on universities, airports, public parks, we would have smaller consumer weather stations blanketing all major cities and rural areas. And we could create sort of a real-time feed on ground truth weather. But what we realized is our customers wanting kind of a snapshot of ground truth, these weather stations weren't really doing it. And the reason for that is weather is kind of one small dimension of the physical environment, right? How much rain has fallen, how much wind, yada, yada. When really the more dominant data source, we think, even as you think about us as humans, is we use our eyes for the vast majority of our decisions, right? Ears and nose, they provide information, but the eyes are the primary data source. And so I got to thinking, like, what does it look like to kind of create a network of eyes that deliver people and businesses truth about the state of their assets? So we looked at satellite a little bit. We looked at fixed CCTV cameras a little bit. I think everyone on this call knows the constraints to both of those models. And then I started looking at drones. I grew up racing RC cars with my brother. We never really got into aerial vehicles, but we're kind of obsessed with the idea that these vehicles, these robots, could explore areas and observe areas that we as humans couldn't, or it was dangerous to do so, or economically unviable. So we started to kind of drill into the frontier of drone technology, which is not something I knew a ton about. I got my Part 107, started screwing around with some minis. Then you realize that really, drones have penetrated every major critical infrastructure category there is. And since 2010, drones have gone from a kind of a novelty for capturing important events like weddings and capturing real estate to like, these things are fundamental infrastructure or fundamental technology for observing the status of our infrastructure in the US. And so we looked at some of the networks out there, and what we saw left a lot to be desired, perhaps an understatement. We see kind of a model where you got really high quality DSPs who are local and typically focus on industries, and then you got these big networks that kind of just throw bodies at problems and still kind of a mess, and invoicing is all over the place and reflies are all over the place, and no one had really built a really nice UX for pilots with a map kind of as the core, right? We work in a spatial industry, we're flying birds in the air, like a map should be the core of these things. So anyway, we saw all these frictions kind of from the very beginning to sourcing pilots to insurance, invoicing, and payments. And we said we can build something better. We can build something better for pilots to ensure that they've got kind of consistent, recurring, meaningful work. They get paid for that work, and the process of discovery is really much better. So the best pilot with the right kind of flight experience and the right hardware in the right area should be staffed on the right job. And so we see really an opportunity to expand the drone services GDP by 10, 20, 30x by really building kind of the platform that we would want if we were to go and be indie drone service pilots ourselves. So hopefully that's a long-winded but useful summary.
It is. So one of the things okay, so my school group here is called Drone Mapping Answers, because one of the things that I found is that there's a I won't say it's a knowledge gap, because my thought process for this was, okay, so you go on YouTube, watch videos, get your Part 107, and everybody's telling you get your Part 107, now you get a license to print money. Yeah. Okay. Now then the other end of it is, well, I made $47,000 this month on this job, and okay, great. How did you get from this point to this point? And that's where the gap is that I see for knowledge here. I do one thing and one thing only. I map. That's my job. I shoot ground control, GNSS. I mean, my stuff is accurate. I work with engineers and surveyors. They're happy with what I do, but this is the focus that I've been in. I've been in the drone space for about 10, let's see, I'm 58 right now. My original company was 47 aerials, so I've been in the drone space for 11 years. Because that's when I got my first drone was I was 47, and it was all FPV stuff, racing and that kind of stuff. And I was making, and I'm going to keep this PG-13. I was making screw you money on my day job. So for me to go out on a Saturday night and crash a drone that I just spent $600 building, yeah, no big deal, because I'm just going to build another one when I'm back next Saturday night. But that's what the whole purpose of my school is to help those guys get from the beginning to the end, because I feel that we're all on the same road. Some of us are just further down the road than others, and some of us are further back. So I'm just trying to get everybody moving in the right direction. So we have these calls every week, accountability calls, if you will, find out what everybody's doing. And that's how this all got started. And one of the things that we do talk about are these drone networks. And you brought up, I just got a text from Matt. Yeah.
I answered him.
Okay, thanks. Good job, Al. We're talking about the UX. So I on this job from Fly Guys from last week, or that I was going to fly Saturday. When I opened it up in the app, it gave the basic details. I was like, sure, it's an hour and a half away. The pay's okay if it's an hour and a half, depending on the site size. Well, I didn't have that site size information there. All I had was just the name of the company, what it paid, and a lat long for the job site. Well, I answered it. Sure, I'm interested. Came back. My contact there reached out to me, and he said that A, we didn't need GNSS on this, and B, if I was asked if I was still up for the flight. At which point, then I went into the online app, because I'm sitting at my desktop, and I pull it up and I realize that it's like this 1,800 acre site. And then I did some math, and I was like, yeah, no, that's not worth. I mean, if I was hurting for money, sure, I'd take the job. It wouldn't be a big win for me, but it would be money in my bank account.
Yep.
But I'm trying to instill in people, look, my prices are my prices. This is what I charge. And there are other people out there that'll cut me. Good for them. I'm all for it. You do you, boo boo. It is what it is. I have mostly steady income from my drone business, and I'm happy with it. I'm always looking to add more to it, but on my terms, not somebody else's terms.
Mm-hmm.
And what you've got going on potentially here is something that may fit my need and be beneficial to what y'all are doing. So what is your, talk to us how this is all, how you see this all working from the pilot's perspective once it's up and fully functional and off of the ground, if you don't mind.
Sure. So look, our goal is to mobilize pilots across the entire expertise spectrum to find meaningful, consistent work. So what we find is at the lower end, guys that have been flying for a year, 18 months with their Part 107s, the reason why they are not full-time earning six figures often has less to do with experience per se, and more so has to do with sales. And so
we're all shaking our heads.
for the experience piece, right? They just got to fly more, right? And to fly more, you got to get gigs, and to get gigs, you got to do sales, right? So it's really one thing. It's a feedback loop. And so if they're delivered work that is kind of within their experience level and they can continue to complete that work, therein lies the transition from part-time amateur intermediate to, hey, I'm really good at this. I'm quitting my bullshit day job. I'm doing this full time. Yet I'm maintaining the independence that drew me to this in the first place, right? I'm not a W-2. I'm not flying for Shell. Although if you're flying for Shell, that's awesome. Do your thing. So for pilots, really, our goal here is to deliver to them consistent work that is either within their experience or just outside. So kind of in that flow state. So you guys check my LinkedIn. We just put up a pilot side demo. But our platform, I think, is pretty nice looking. Pilots will onboard. They'll put in the usual details, birds, Part 107. We'll have a section that adds certifications, special equipment, 4x4s, PPE, things of that nature. And then they'll be transported into a map view. And the map is really kind of the heartbeat of RAAD. And on that map is where you'll see missions. You'll see them clustered by area. You'll see the price available on there. One of the things that was really important to us in building this was to maintain transparency and simplicity throughout the entire process. So, for example, the price that is shown on a map to a pilot is what a pilot puts in his pocket. There's no fees on top of that. There's no variable margin. There's no, this is what a client's paying us. This is what you get. There's no, hey, we're using a credit card, so there'll be a 3.5% fee. That's what the mission is priced as. Pilots will be able to accept those missions if they are qualified for the industry. So we do a little work on our end to ensure that they've had flight hours within a certain industry. Obviously, for things like commercial real estate, we're not going to be too picky. Whereas for stuff like telecoms, we want to see experience there. Got to have the right bird for the deliverable. So we don't actually force clients to select the drones that pilots should be flying. Clients select their deliverables, and we back into the drones that can deliver those deliverables. And then proximity, right? So typically, we won't allow a pilot for a job below a certain pay to accept a job if it's not within 200 miles. Of course, there are exceptions, but for the most part, we don't want pilots accepting a whole bunch of different jobs that they won't be able to fulfill. So a pilot will accept that job. They'll start the mission on the start date. Once the mission is completed, and we do a lot of white gloving on the back end. So Jeff, you'll be talking to Chris Tavani, our head of growth, later. He manages all of our flight operations, makes sure that everything goes absolutely to plan. We see a lot of drone service networks that are middlemen that throw bodies at problems. It's not what we're doing. We're not interested in that. We're interested in every client that lists a job on our platform is thrilled with the outcome. So Chris typically will help our pilots make sure they understand the site, make sure that they've applied for Lance, make sure they have access instructions, make sure if there's two pilots, they're not connected to different RTK networks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just high quality assurance. Pilot will complete that job. They will upload their data directly to RAAD. So images, videos, whatever that may be. We do the processing on our end in-house. We do QA before it heads to the client. We submit it to the client, and the pilot gets paid. One thing I'll mention is another kind of dynamic that we think will change and must change is RAAD is a business. We're a drone services network. What a business does is it defines the price of the product or service it's willing to pay. In drone services network land, you have a little bit of an odd dynamic where clients choose the price that we list or that drone service network lists on their platform. What that often means is clients are like, I want a super competitive price. I want to make pilots bid against each other, and we're going to get lowest common denominator. We think ultimately that doesn't really work very well.
No.
We think for the most part, and I think 80% of jobs fall under this category. If it falls within a certain industry and you've got the size of the parcel and you've got the bird that's required to complete the mapping or deliverable for that parcel, you should be able to standardize pricing to some extent. And so what clients will see in our platform is similar to kind of an eBay smart price is based on the scope of your job. Here is how RAAD would competitively price this at a market rate. And then pilots will be able to accept that rate, knowing that they are not being undercut, also knowing that they will not be competing against other pilots. If you claim a mission, that mission is yours. Hope that gives you a decent summary.
It does. And, you know, you brought up something that I've had an issue in the past doing work for a drone service network. Um, the the company in question reached out to me about the job. It was a distance. It was fine. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. I'm pretty much the only guy out here on the Eastern Plains that flies, I guess. Um, I get to the job site. I looked at the information, and the first flight that I had, um, the client, and this is the question that I have for you. The client had went into, and I'm not a fan of drone deploy. They've got their model. It works for them. I'm just not a fan of their accuracy. That's neither here nor there for this mission. But the client had built the mission inside a drone deploy.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is that it was a 4-acre site, and he had me flying at 50 feet on a double grid, and all I was doing was an ortho. Um, there's no point in that. That's too much time in the air for my bird. There's going to be problems stitching because you're looking through a straw. It was just way too much. Ended up going to the client. Well, he had placed the mission in the wrong place. So I had to go back and refly it. They paid me the second time around. And now I'm flying a truck stop that has obstacles in it. The first one was just a big open field, which didn't raise any red flags for me other than this is stupid flying at 50 feet. My question getting to you is that, are the clients going to set the mission, or are you going to leave that, or is the client going to at a, I won't say a maximum, but is the client going to provide you with the KML, and then you're going to pass that on to the pilot to let him do his job, or are there going to be an in between, or how's that going to? How do you see that working out?
That's a great question. And again, we think about this slightly differently as well. There's a wide range of clients. Some are hyper sophisticated and understand drones and like drones and want to define mission parameters. In our view, that is a minority. I think most just want the data and they want it to be delivered cleanly. So what our goal to do at RAAD is the client will be able to put in the key information that drives the deliverable. So address, lat long. We will impute the parcel based on data we've ingested. The client will choose something like GSD. The client will choose the deliverable. Does it need to be a GeoTIFF? Is it an LAS, et cetera? And then everything else in terms of how the mission is scoped, how it is detailed, and how it is delivered happens on the RAAD side. And so our goal is to be good enough at this that what you've just described doesn't happen, where you're like, look, RAAD is telling me that I should be flying at this altitude. I know that's not quite right for the site. It's going to waste time. It's not going to give me the GSD I want. I'm going to be too low. We're not going to get it right immediately, but unlike a lot of other networks, we've brought on experts like Chris, who's been flying for 7 years. He's seen all of these issues, right? And so we're designing this in a way that he as a pilot would want to use. So at the end of the day, pilots should be able to show up, and it should be as simple as possible to do the thing that they want to do, which is fly. And all of the requirements and the flight settings and the mission scope should be appropriate for that site. And again, initially, we're not going to get that right. We do not want to be in a position where clients are prescribing to our pilots how to fly. We do want to be in a position for RAAD to take that client deliverable and transform it into settings that make sense for the pilot. And that's going to take some time to build that trust, right? Pilots are going to be like, well, I'm a pilot. I know my shit. I'm going to do it my way. And if they're going about it their way and they see the way that RAAD has laid out the mission is identical to how they would do it, then that builds trust. You do that enough times, and then people are like, I'm excited to use the app, right? It solves problems for me. It has access information. It allows me to check in. It shows me kind of the parcel details. It shows me the lat long. It shows me the exact deliverable, the exact altitude, et cetera, et cetera. It might even give me information, for example, about when it's a good time to fly. So we have weather APIs built into the app. Like we have all of the Lance approved vendors built into the app. We have things like which RTK networks we would recommend in this area built into the app. And we're hoping that those tools, rather than being prescriptive to pilots are like, yeah, That's actually sounds right. I'm going to go with these options. Makes it easy at the end of the day.
That's awesome. And coming back to that, when I went back and reflew that, like I said, it was a truck stop. So I've got vehicles moving throughout the photo. So you've got ghosting going on everywhere. And I ended up catching a light pole because it was exceeded my, yeah, we'll just stop there. But anyway, it was the worst map that it is like, you all actually paid me for that crap map. And it's like, and I went through and line by line detailed out to them what the problems were with this flight. And I was surprised they reached out to me for this 1,800-acre job because I let them know what I thought. I was nice about it. I wasn't irate. I just laid out every problem that I encountered on that mission, like not being able to reach out to my handler, for lack of a better term, my contact there when I ran into problems initially. It took him 3 hours to get back to me while I'm sitting on site twiddling my thumbs because I had questions that weren't in it. So if it comes off like you just explained, this should be awesome. And in the beginning, there's always going to be growing pains. I mean, hell, I've been having growing pains for the last 5 years, and finally this year, I'm stepping away from all of this, and I'm stepping out on my own because I've reached that point with my business where it's like, okay, I can do this. Um, I can do this, and I am doing this. So,
Michael,
but
I think the other thing, and you kind of described this this 1,000-acre job where the economics just didn't really tie out for you, and you had the luxury of turning down that job because you've got enough alternatives. But ultimately, what we've found is what we expected initially was to be building a network for really just amateurs and intermediates, right? These are the guys that were part-time that want to go full-time. And we're like, look, the professionals, if you will, like yourselves, they're not going to have a use for us. And in fact, the networks that they've dealt with in the past have been poor enough experiences that we're probably not building for them. What we found actually is for the exact reason that you just laid out, which is a lot of these guys. So Chris was one of these guys, and he was considering going to Greece for a month, and he wants to be with his family, and he's got a kid on the way, and all these things. A lot of pilots don't really want to do the travel thing as much or really anymore. And so oftentimes what a client will do is they will assume, because it's historically been the case, that they need to build a margin in to reflect for lodging and travel, when in reality, there should be a pilot nearby for whom the economics are much better because the travel, the per diem, the lodging piece is just not a component. So if I can get we were talking to the two best LiDAR guys in the industry, and they found us. And I was like, what? We're like, what? Like, what are you interested in here? And they're like, look, if you can get us reasonable deal flow for using our very expensive birds nearby, that's interesting to us inherently. And so I think that's a compelling component for kind of the better pilots is I want to continue running my business the way that I have. I know my skill set. I can do it on my own, but I would love to not be on the road for 40 weeks a year. I would love if I had consistent deal flow in my state. And those economics are much different when you don't have guys traveling with their birds all across the country, doing lodging, all these things, et cetera. Some people love that stuff. Other guys, they don't want to do that stuff anymore. And so we're here to say, hey, we're going to deliver you interesting work in your area. If you want to pick it up, awesome. Let's do it. If not, all good.
I think that you're going to find that you're talking about, the intermediate and the beginner pilots. I think you're also going to find there are, and I'll correct you. I am that guy. If there's work in my area that is not, if I've got a gap in a schedule or, I don't think anybody's opposed to making money. And you touched on the travel side. So right now, I run work from, I don't know how well you know Colorado. I run work from just north of Colorado Springs, south to, not Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, up in Severance, to just south of Colorado Springs, as far east as Rocky Ford and as far west as Idaho Springs. I cover a pretty large area. And in the Northeast, there's Ray. So my longest drives are 3 hours one way. I'm compensated for that. That's great. I don't have a problem with that. Would I rather work close to home? Yes. Have I turned down offers from companies